he passed away. And so we got together and went. I don't know how we went, in a wagon or riding horses. I don't remember that part. To the cemetery, and it was several miles. I guess maybe 30 miles where we went to the cemetery. And the horses got out of the lot while we were gone. And my mother had washed a quilt and hung it on the line to dry. And when we came back, the horses had got out of the lot and were eating the grass in the yard. And one corner of that quilt had gotten loose and fallen down on the grass. And that horse eating around there got that corner of that quilt caught in his mouth as he was eating that grass and chewing that grass. And he had chewed and chewed and chewed on that quilt and swallowed and swallowed and swallowed that quilt until he had a whole lot of it down in his intestines. This is a brand new tape in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Bob, as I sit here sometimes by myself at night and think over my life and think over the past, I think about that song, Precious Memories, how they linger. And I think about some of these things and the people that I've known and where my life came from. And my dad was John David Vandall. Most people called him J.D. or Dick Vandall. And he was known all over that country because he went from place to place. Wherever timber was being cut and sawed, he was always there sawing the lumber on the big sawmills. And my mother was Edna Florence Hedrick. Her parents lived out at Long, West Virginia, and her father was a farmer. He had a great big orchard where he raised a lot of apples and sold apples, all kinds of apples. He had a huge apple orchard. And he raised sheep. And I can remember those sheep up on the hillside there when we'd go there as a child. And remember going to the apple orchard. He always kept his trees so trimmed and nice, and back there then, I don't know how it happened, but he didn't have to spray his trees all the time, and they weren't full of worms and bugs like they are today. They were beautiful apples, and they didn't have to fight that. And in the fall, he would always grind those apples somehow or the other. I don't fully understand how he did it, and made great big barrels of cider that turned to vinegar. And then he sold the vinegar. He put it in jars and sold vinegar to people all around that country for them to make their pickles and stuff with. And so that's the way they lived. My grandma and Grandpa Hedrick. He was Joseph Hedrick, and my grandma was Sarah Puckett Hedrick. And we used to love to go to their house and spend the night and go to church with them on Sundays sometimes. Because I loved to do that because he had a fancy buggy that had this thing over the top. I don't know what you call it, over the top. If it rained, you didn't get wet. Sunshine, and the seats were leather. And we'd get ready to go to church with them on Sunday morning, get our fancy hats and everything on, and go to the church out there with them, the church they went to at Long. Of course, it was all-day service like we were used to going to. But on Saturday night, if it was cool weather, they'd have a fire in the fireplace. And for supper time, Grandma would make what she called a pone of cornbread, cook it on the hearth. Granddad would rake out a great big pile of red coals on the hearth, and she'd set that, it was an iron pot of a thing on those coals, and put the lid on it, and they'd pile the coals up around the side and over the lid. A little while it was done, and we'd have buttermilk and cornbread night. And that was fascinating to me, to do that, to go to my grandparents' house. But there's where I saw the Bible read the most. Because my Grandpa Hedrick, we'd always go to the table when we had a meal at the table, or at bedtime. He'd always get his Bible out and read it, and we'd have prayer. And to me, that helped me to know that God was real, and I never in my life doubted God, because my Grandpa Hedrick knew God. My Grandma Hedrick knew God. And I knew those sheep and those beautiful apples and all that stuff was the blessing from God coming to them. So I never doubted God, or I never doubted Jesus, because of that, my grandparents' home, where I was. And I remember the carpets on the floor. My grandma wove her own carpets. She had what you call a loom. There, she made her own cloth, and sewed and made her clothes. And the way she made those rugs, she made them in sections, so she could take them apart in the spring and wash them and hang them on the line and dry, and then stitch them back together and put them back down clean in the spring when she cleaned the house. She had carpets on the floor, and it was amazing to me how that she was wise enough to know how to spin that thread on that spinning wheel and make cloth, and then sew it into clothes and make that carpet like she made it. And I just thought they were the smartest people in the world, and they were good people, and I learned so much from them and the way they lived. They were thankful people. And my Grandma Hedrick, she was a pocket. She had a lot of brothers, and she had one brother that ran a restaurant over there, Rainelle. And after I was even grown and married, I used to love to go down there at Rainelle and go in there when he was old. He and his wife still running that restaurant, and go down there and eat at his restaurant and see him. And then you see my Grandma Sarah Puckett's sister was Lovey Susan France, and her husband was Abe France. I sent you a little book one time with their pictures in the front of it. Abe France, the minister, my Grandma's sister's husband, and him was in front of that picture, was in front of that book where he wrote that book about, well, it was really about the Jehovah's Witness, but they would call something else back there then. But anyway, he was a minister, and they had a church there, and when we'd go out there, and the cemetery was right up on the hill, way up on the hill above that church, and that's where my father and my brother are buried, up on that hill. It's called the France Cemetery. And when we used to go over there, Memorial Day, go up on that hill, put flowers on the grave. Uncle Abe and Aunt Susie, they had a big dining room with a real long table. And they looked forward to everybody coming there on the 30th of May, and bringing their food and putting it on that table, and everybody eating there with them on Memorial Day, and everybody going up on that hill to the cemetery together, where the family folks were buried. My grandparents are buried there. But then coming back to, on the Vandall side, my dad's, and my mother and dad were third cousins, and I would have to go through the records again to tell just how that came about. They were third cousins. But my dad's father's name was Crawford Vandall.